Hi, Caroline. Let us go through migration. So for this next slide, we're going to be looking at four really important. We're going to be looking at two of these three movements in migration patterns. We're looking at where people are immigrating to. So they're emigrating from their country and immigrating, or they're migrant workers in these particular regions. So the Americas is a destination, and a lot of the people are going to be coming from Europe, Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean Rim, and Australasia, which I'll talk to you about in just a second. But this is the Indian Ocean Rim right here. And then the last one, which we're not really going to discuss at all, is this Manchuria, Central Asia group of people. And that's because it doesn't really have any international impact. It impacts Russia a lot, but really nobody else. So this is Australasia. It is Australia and Papua New Guinea and bits of Polynesia way out here, New Zealand. This is the region that we're going to talk about when we say Australasia. It's not just Australia that's going to be affected, but a lot of the people who are going to be moving into these regions are going to be doing the same kind of work all over. So really it is Australia predominantly, but these are the other places that they're going to be going. And these are the major movements. So we're going to start with the movement out of Europe and other places into North America. So we can see that people are moving from East Asia, including Japan and China, and they're moving into North and South America. We see a mass movement of Europeans into North America and even into South America. And then we have a few Africans who are moving into this region. It is still part of the forced diaspora of slavery, because that is still going on in this time period. The other thing that we have is movement into Southeast Asia. Once again, we still have slaves moving in at the beginning of this time period from 1750 to about 1870, but we see lots of migrants moving into Australasia, Southeast Asia, and New Zealand because so much of it is part of the British Empire and French Imperial Empire. This is the one that we're not going to talk much about today, and this is the one that predominantly affects Eastern Russia and Manchuria. So we're going to start with a small group of individuals who chose to relocate of their own volition. It was their choice, and they were offered some good money to do that. We're going to start with some skilled laborers. So these skilled laborers were often college educated, and they did three basic things. Firstly, they were potentially involved in the governing of an imperial colony. We call this the colonial service. You are in a colony and you are part of the government of that colony. So if you were part of the Indian government during the time of the Raj, or if you were part of governing South Africa while the British were there, maybe you were in French Indochina while France was ruling it, or Algeria, but that's the colonial service. You're part of the political fabric of that colonial society. The biggest group, really overall though, are going to be engineers and geologists, people who are here to help design canals, roads, railroads, looking for mineral wealth like iron or gold or anything. But really it's almost a diaspora of engineers and geologists leaving Europe and heading out into the colonies. And then the last big group are the entrepreneurs. Our perfect example of this is going to be Argentina, but these are individuals who have some wealth and then say, you know what, let's see if we can make some more wealth by taking a risk. And they will move about these colonial lands and try to make extra money. So these are our skilled workers. The next group is very specific to Japan, and these are the colonization societies that they set up. Everywhere that you see these little dots right here, these are colonies that are part of the Colonization Society of Japan. This is not successful. The goal was that Japan would take their excess population and send it out of Japan in order to reduce the population, and then hopefully create markets that they can sell goods to because they're industrialized. What actually happened is they sent people out and then they kind of got assimilated into other cultures. So it's not that they didn't have a devotion to Japan, it's just that all they really accomplished was reducing their population. The economic benefit of sending people away and then purchasing Japanese goods didn't really happen. So our next key concept is looking at coerced and semi-coerced labor systems. So these are people who maybe volunteered but didn't really understand what they were doing, or even worse, they were forced to go and do this labor around the world. Now, we looked at 3 reasons that this might be the case. The first was that industrialized societies needed more workers, and so it was helpful to have people migrating within their regions. We're not talking about moving Asian people or Southeast Asians or Indian people into Europe, but we're talking about moving people within their society from rural regions to urban regions. But they also needed people to grow infrastructure. So like in our own country, we're going to bring in Irish workers and Chinese workers to build railroads. And then extracting raw materials like mining for iron or for coal, they're going to use whoever is available, no matter what country they're from. And we'll also see that industrialized societies like England are going to bring in food from other regions where they have people growing food for them, because it's so industrialized, they just don't, the population is growing, they're not able to keep up. The other reason is that industrialized societies want better opportunities. And when they look at their colonizers and they say, wow, they have a lot of money, I wonder what it's like there, they go and try and do that. And then there's this last group that hopes to get relief from political disorder and or famine. And we'll look specifically here at Italy and Ireland. So on to your next study guide slide, we are looking at 4 types of labor systems, and then we'll go through the examples of each. So we have to start with slavery, because don't forget that slavery is still a thing at the beginning of this time period. People are enslaved until 1870. That's the last country to finally abolish slavery. And the slave trade itself isn't even banned until 1803. So 1750 to 1900, slavery is still a thing, but it is on the decline. And as slavery is declining in importance, colonizing nations or just any kind of imperial nation that's looking to create industrialized workforce wants cheap raw materials. They want cheap labor, and they're going to try and find other ways to acquire it. And that's what takes us to our next 3 examples. So indentured servitude. This is not new. Indentured servitude has been around since the first colonial era. That's how a lot of Europeans made it to the New World. But this one is not going to be Europeans. In this case, we're going to be looking at a lot of Indians. And this is because they're part of the British Empire. And it's really easy for the British to say, well, we're going to move you from India into South Africa because we need help on sugar plantations, when they own South Africa too. So they have to pay off their journey by working for 7 years. And we'll see that a lot of them are going to do some pretty terrible work that slaves often did. As our next group is as well, and these are Chinese contract laborers. Now, you could have many different kinds of contract laborers, but the biggest group of contract laborers were the Chinese. Probably second to that would be the Japanese, who are going to go out into the Pacific and work on plantations out in Oceania. But Chinese contract laborers are going to make it everywhere in the world. And they usually signed a 3-year term. These are really sketchy conditions. The standard of living where they're going is terrible. They have horrible jobs that they have to fulfill, and they get paid almost nothing. These subsistence wages aren't enough to make them any kind of real profit. So they get really trapped in these systems. But we can't forget our last system of coerced labor, and that is convict labor. And we can actually feel bad for convict labor, because remember, if you stole pretty much anything in the British Empire, you were being sent to Australia. So it wasn't like these were all murderers and stuff, okay? They could have been impersonating Egyptians for all we know. But These convict laborers are going to do a lot of infrastructure building. They're going to do roads and railways and canals, and they're going to establish farms and clear land. They're doing just a lot of hard labor, and the British are not the only ones to do this. The French are also going to participate. The French have an island called New Caledonia, which is this tiny little speck of island way off the coast of Australia and New Zealand. I mean, it is so isolated. And then they also have French Guiana, which is in the northern part of South America. But the French and the British are both going to have penal colonies that use convict labor. That's the big takeaway. Our next key concept is going to look at how environmental factors influenced these migrants to leave their areas. And these migrants can be because they're immigrating or because they are doing temporary work. But our big takeaways here are these three reasons that we need to look at. We did them in class individually, and I had everybody kind of brainstorm what they know about it and what would make people want to leave. So these are our three options. I encourage you to pause the video for a minute and see if you can't come up with reasons why. Number one, urbanization would cause people to want to leave urban areas. Number two, why colonizers showing up or the presence of economic imperialism would cause people to want to leave their nations. And then how population growth in rural areas would affect the desire of people to leave those areas as well. All right, so hopefully you paused, but this is what we're talking about. Remember that urban societies, especially like the cities that urban societies are creating, they're really terrible. You have tenements and unclean water, lack of sanitation, pollution. I mean, it's just really terrible. And sometimes people just don't like it. And yeah, you grow up in London, you're like, wow, this place is really awful. I need a better escape. Maybe I can make my way to the United States. And then you show up at a tenement in New York. But at least there's an opportunity that you could move out of this region and go someplace else. And perhaps as an American citizen, have greater opportunity. The other one is going to be, we talked about these colonizers and economic imperialists. Our greatest example of a colonizer is England in India, and they hijacked the entire economic and political system of India, turning it into pretty much just a raw material factory, just export, 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 all these raw materials that Britain uses for manufacturing. This is not going to do much for the Indian economy, and people are going to want other opportunities. The other problem here is China. China is the victim of a bunch of European nations, and these spheres of influence have hijacked the economy in places that had a really strong economy previous to this, and that's going to lead to a lot of Chinese migrant workers. And then lastly, as populations grow, particularly in rural areas, land becomes scarce and people cannot make a living at farming anymore, and this will cause them to leave and to try and find land elsewhere. So I think this is where we left off, the last thing that you were absent for when we went over this in class. So we're just looking now at case studies in those forms of labor migrations. And this one is absolutely about the presence of colonizers and the desire for Indians to have better opportunity. Now, 1.5 million Indians are going to choose indentured servitude. Lots more are going to be forced into indentured servitude, but they're hoping that this will be an opportunity to make more money. They're going to go to Mauritius, which you can see is that tiny little dot off of Madagascar. It's like Mauritius is to Madagascar what New Caledonia is to New Zealand. But wherever they go, Mauritius, British Guiana, Dutch Guiana, and particularly Trinidad and Tobago, we're going to see them involved in sugar production. Now, the other place that we're going to see a lot of Indian migrants is going to be in Southeast Asia, and that is because one of the things we discuss later on in the chapter is the establishment of the Kangani system, which encourages individuals to recruit their family members in hopes of getting a better pay or a shortened period of time of repayment, of their debt, I mean. So these are the places that we're going to see a lot of Indian migrants due to economic factors at home. So hopefully that took care of everything that you needed. If you need any more clarification, please don't hesitate to ask, but I hope this helps and you do great on the test. I'll see you in class.